Have you ever felt like you're on your own when it comes to asking honest questions about faith? Like you're the only one deconstructing what you were taught, trying to make sense of who Jesus really is? Well, you're not alone. That's exactly why I created the Rebuilding Faith online community. It's a place for people just like you, those who don't fit in the mold of traditional church spaces, but who still believe that Jesus is worth following. Inside the community, we dig deeper into the content from this podcast. We process the stuff that doesn't always get talked about, and we wrestle together with what it means to follow a Jesus-looking God. It's a safe, meaningful, and honest environment to grow with others who get it. As a member, you'll get my weekly newsletter, guided book studies, downloadable discussion guides, and early access to everything that I create. You'll also be helping me create more of this content. Check out the link in the show notes to join the conversation today. Well, today we are sitting down with my friend Andrew DeCort to talk about his upcoming book coming out in October, although as we get into the episode, evidently people who are pre-ordering it now are starting to get copies. So I'm not sure how that works, but something you may be interested in. Andrew is a friend. He's a writer with a deep commitment to love, and you are going to quickly see that from his posture throughout this episode. He founded the Institute for Faith and Flourishing, and he co-founded the Neighbor Love movement in Ethiopia, which have reached over 20 million people with the invitation to non-violent spirituality. He received his PhD in theological ethics from the University of Chicago, and he has taught ethics, public theology, peace and conflict studies, and Ethiopian studies at Wheaton College, the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology, and the University of Bonn. Andrew is the author of 4 books. The latest is Reviving the Golden Rule. He has Blessed Are the Others, Flourishing on the Edge of Faith, and Bonhoeffer's New Beginning. Andrew just started a Substack called Reframe, which focuses on reading hard headlines through the lens of Jesus's Beatitudes. This is a guy that oozes the love and the presence of Jesus, and I'm so excited for you to get to hear from him today. This is episode 53, Reviving the Golden Rule.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly. There's so many things happening in this conversation right now. 1,000 years from now, people are going to be looking at this podcast saying, so this was the breakthrough.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I have been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on this show.
I will also say as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table, we're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thank you for the hospitality that this particular podcast provides folks like myself, and I know others, to be curious around their faith practices.
I really appreciate this venue, what you're doing. It is fun, and yet you dig into the deep stuff.
I've heard about your podcast for a long time, and I love that you're a pastor and that you explore the world of faith through wine. That's very unique.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So I
got a little spicy there. It's the peach wine.
Apparently the wine is, here we are. Queer we are. Beer we are. No, it's wine, Jeremy.
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
I know why you have your guests drink wine. It makes sense now. Yeah, I get it. A little bit of liquid courage to really unleash the beast.
I think you've got a good podcast. So throw in the wine bit in there. That's nice. That's it. Cabernet and Bray, yeah.
Welcome to the podcast, my friend. Andrew DeCort.
It's good to be here, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on. Never done this before with the setup.
Yeah, and Andrew is a very smart guy who I'm bringing down to our level today. So this is going to be fun. So we already had a wardrobe change. He's got a beverage. He's ready to go. I'm excited for this. This is going to be good. Andrew and I, we've never met in person, but the last time I talked with you, we were just talking. It was not for anything other than just two dudes talking about life and Jesus. And I walked away from that conversation, and I told my wife this. I said, there's like a handful of people that when you talk to them, you feel like, I'll use a wine analogy here, like they are uncorking something in you, like just the act of that conversation almost like guides out parts of you that you know are there, but sometimes you don't always know how to access. And that's literally how I would describe my last conversation with you. And I wish we would have recorded it because it would have made a great episode. So then I learned from that and I thought, well, let's have another conversation, and this one we will record.
Amazing, Jeremy. I am so honored that was an uncorking conversation for you. I felt like I was meeting someone that made me feel seen and sane as, somebody who kind of lives in between worlds and seeks to build deep relationships between communities and convictions that are sometimes pulled apart. So this is super exciting.
Well, let's talk about what we're drinking. That's the fun part. So I'll go first. I'll share mine, and we'll see what you got in your glass. Today I'm going to the old world of wine. I've got a 2020 Chateau de la Chapelle, which is super exciting. And this is from Bordeaux. It's a Bordeaux blend. This has got 85% Merlot, 15% Cabernet Sauvignon. And I'm a big fan of Bordeaux. I had a chance a few years ago to take a trip to Bordeaux and just got hooked on that whole region, what they're doing with winemaking. These guys have been doing it literally as like long as anybody. So if you talk who has dialed in the wine, the winemakers in Bordeaux have figured it out. I'm getting notes of black cherry, plum, graphite, cedar. And what's fun about this one, so just so any listeners know who you're into wine, we often look at years and you can tell a lot about what happened that year. That's what makes wine interesting. 2020, I'm gun shy for a couple reasons. One is there were fires in Oregon that year, and I lived in Oregon that year. And so the Oregon Pinot in 2020 is not good. So if you see an Oregon Pinot from 2020, probably is going to taste a little bit like a campfire. And you don't see many of those in around anymore because they didn't age well. So I'm skeptical of that. Then obviously it was a pandemic year. A lot happened. Everything was crazy. But fun fact for the listeners today, 2020 was actually a good year for Bordeaux. So if you have any of those thoughts that I have, but you see a Bordeaux blend from 2020, don't be afraid. It was actually a really good year. So I'm really enjoying this. This is a great sipper for a deep conversation, and I'm excited to enjoy it as I talk to you. Andrew, what do you got in your glass today?
I've got a Villa Maria New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc from 2023, Jeremy.
New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is my fave.
Really?
Oh, I love it.
I'm enjoying it too. I think this is probably the earliest in the day that I've ever had a glass of wine. So this is a lot of fun here.
Love it. Welcome to day drinking.
Cheers to Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther King Jr. behind me in the presence of this wine, and to you, my brother. This is good stuff.
All right, cheers to you. Yeah, Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, they're known for high acidity, which I really like. That high acidity, it's fun to drink, and I like the flavor of it. And so if you get Sauvignon Blancs from elsewhere in the world, they often have lower acidity. But man, New Zealand knows how to let it rip on the acidity.
What's the mark of a high acidity when I'm tasting this?
You can kind of feel like a little tingle of it in the back of your mouth. It goes really good with food too because of that acidity. So a lot of wines get dwarfed by food because they just can't keep up. But if you have a wine with high acidity, it can usually hang. So if eating chicken or pasta or something, you get a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, that is a nice pairing together. Not that you have an entire meal in front of you right now, but just for the future.
It's behind the screen. You can't see it, but there's
there you
chicken
go.
and pasta and salad and bread.
Yes, that would make the episode more fun. Although I suspect our listeners wouldn't enjoy all the chewing, but we'll save you from that.
Right on.
Okay, Andrew, I want to ask you a question about Cabernet. Yeah, there you go. We add an element to it each time. I want to ask you a question about your journey, so listeners can get a little bit of context of who we're talking to today, a little bit of where you come from, and it's a question I love to begin with, to give each guest kind of a recent journey of where you've been. If you were to look at the last 10 years of your own journey, your own faith, how would you say that your faith has changed in the last 10 years?
Wow. So 10 years ago, I was graduating from the University of Chicago with my PhD in theological ethics. And I think over the last 10 years, when I finished that, Jeremy, I was preparing to move to Ethiopia with my wife, Lily, who was born and raised in Ethiopia, and began living and working there for a new chapter of my life. I think my faith has changed in becoming aware of how little I know, grounding in an ever-expanding sense of mystery and the radical humility that comes with seeing faith as being a deep conviction rather than a possessed or grasped certainty. I think my faith has changed and expanded in seeing like the presence of Jesus in people I never may have expected. Like some incredible Muslim neighbors that I've met in Nablus in a refugee camp in Palestine, in Harar, in this city in the far east of Ethiopia, a man named Abdi, meeting Jesus and people who may not even recognize Jesus as being a revelation of God's presence or God's face. That's been a really wonderful surprise in my faith over the last 10 years, Jeremy. I often go back to that verse in Genesis, I think 28, where Jacob says, God was in this place and I didn't know it. I think I've seen this expansion of, wow, I built these walls around the presence of God. I thought maybe God was here in specific places or in specific people, and God keeps surprising me in being present in and through all people and places. And the presence of creation. I'm looking out this window at this just beautiful tree whose trunk is so firm and whose branches are dancing in the wind, seeing the presence of Jesus in that creation. So definitely an increasing sense of how little I know, of how faith is really grounded in humble conviction rather than a kind of arrogant / insecure certainty. This sense of surprise and anticipation of meeting God everywhere and seeing that from start to finish, authentic faith is about love. It's about a life of meeting beyond ourselves and connecting and seeing the precious value of others and the precious value of myself and the precious value of all that God has been made. So in so many ways, my faith has become grounded and expanded in love. Love not as just fuzzy feelings, Jeremy. Like love can be so painful, so full of grief, so full of loss. 10 years ago, Jeremy, I didn't know that love was going to be part of my journey of working in a civil war and seeing so many people that I deeply care about watching their community experience mass killing and mass displacement and mass rape, and love saying like, no, you can't look away. Stay engaged because there's precious value in every person who's suffering. There's precious value in the people who are perpetrating this suffering. So the love that I'm saying is not, just, kind of sugary, sweet, superficial, like everything's fine. It's this invitation to see precious value even where there is deep pain, deep disagreement, where we want to like cut people off or even cut myself off. So my faith has done a lot of evolving, expanding, deepening. It's simplified and complexified at the same time. My friend Dave likes to use the term simplexity. I feel like my faith has become more simplex, more simple and complex at the same time. Maybe like this wine that we're drinking, I'm not sure. So,
I love that.
man,
It
brother.
sounds like
Oof.
you are taking a posture of being more open to, you had an idea of what love was, you had an idea of who God was, and yet your lived out experience of that has broadened it, and you're more open to seeing God in ways that you didn't anticipate.
Big time, man, big time. And seeing God in ways I didn't anticipate, that like maybe before would have seemed threatening and now just seem wondrous and beautiful and like, oh yeah, that's God. God doesn't respect the walls and the barriers and the barricades that we set up, but is always present with us.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you have a book coming out in October, your latest book, and I had the chance to read it. It's fantastic. You're very smart, Andrew. I don't know if you know this. You're very smart. And so I would have to take breaks and just catch up to where you were and process some of your ideas. But you write, the way I would describe it is, it feels like you've read 10 books if you've read one of yours, because you dive so deeply into other material, so deeply into other thinkers, which is it's really a profound gift to go on a journey with you. And so even as I was coming up with some questions for this, I'm like, so many of these ideas are so big, I can't even formulate them into like quick questions. It's like these are whole side discussions, but I picked a few that I think are easy enough to put our hands around. But one of the words that you use throughout the book, and I really appreciated the way you use this word, and I feel like it gave me a tool, and perhaps will give our listeners a tool of describing what we see happening in real time around us. And it's the way that you use the word othering, of how we other people. And that's when we create this us versus them. And you really unpack a lot of that. And you say this in the book: in many ways, I see othering as the fundamental crisis of our humanity. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, thank you for reading the book, Jeremy, and thank you for giving your attention to it. We live in a time that is demanding our attention at all times. And for you to pause and spend time with my book is a precious gift. I want to say thank you for it. By othering, I mean seeing other people as unrelated or less than ourselves. So unrelated might just mean like, I don't see myself as having a connection to you. I don't know who you are. We've never met. I don't really need to care about what's happening in your life. Less is when this becomes a little bit more pernicious, a little bit more dangerous. Maybe I think that I'm more intelligent than you. I think I'm more moral or righteous than you. Maybe I think that I'm, closer to God. I'm higher than you in some kind of hierarchy of human value, or what some people have called the great chain of being. I'm more up there and you're down here, or I'm more at the center of things and you're, more at the periphery, just not as important as what's happening in my life. And I think othering is perhaps the greatest crisis facing our humanity, because it sets up the conditions for the injustices that destroy human life. So if I see you as unrelated to me, that's the basis of indifference. I don't really care if you're suffering, if you're lonely, if you're misunderstood and misrepresented. Like, Jeremy, like, I've experienced a lot of character assassination in my life. I mentioned the Ethiopian Civil War, and that unleashed a flood of representations of me as like a CIA agent or like an assassination who had like orchestrated the plots to kill people. Like being misrepresented, I think everybody knows, is just extremely painful and it's injurious. It's wounding to our sense of who we are. If I'm saying, you know, Jeremy, like you're actually a liar and a cheater, and you're cheap. You don't matter. So I don't care what happens in your life. Othering, if I see you as unrelated to me, then I begin tolerating those types of experiences in the people around me. If I see you as less, I begin seeing you as needing to be punished. Like maybe I need to wake you up by making you suffer. That could be physically or psychologically, again, where I'm degrading you, I'm demeaning you, I am belittling you, making you smaller than you are. And I often use this example. My wife and I love the Lord of the Rings. We love the Lord of the Rings movies. And, I bet, Jeremy, that like few people have like cringed when they see like Legolas like decapitate an orc, or when you see like an arrow go through like 3 orc heads in a row. Like you just laughed, and we see it as comical. Why? Because we don't see the orcs as connected to us. We don't see them as equal in value. So what happens to them doesn't matter. And like this othering process begins unleashing dehumanization, where I don't just see you as less than me. I don't see you as part of me and part of the larger human family. And dehumanization gives way to what this philosopher Judith Butler has called ungrievability. And I think this is an extremely important idea, Jeremy, and I'm going to try to make it practical. Ungrievability really means that if you're grieving, I don't care. That your pain doesn't matter to me. And how do we see this? For example, in the Ethiopian Civil War, this is likely the deadliest civil war that's happened in the 21st century. A lot of us haven't heard about it, but it was estimated that maybe over 1 million people were killed, and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of women experienced sexual violence. And, 20 million people subjected to extreme food insecurity. And you ask, okay, this is a really, really religious society where almost everybody's going to church or to mosque. They're wearing religious symbols, like God is being spoken about regularly. How is it possible that this level of suffering of people not that far away could not only be like tolerated or accepted, but is seen as necessary? This happens through othering. When we're like, well, those people, if we see them as people, maybe we see them as weeds or as cancers or as devils, they need to be punished or they need to be eliminated in order for us to be safe, for God's will to be done, for things to be right. Now, I would say, Jeremy, that we're like seeing a similar emergence of perspectives and vocabularies here in the United States. We hear more and more public leaders, and I'm not just going to pick one. That'd be too easy, because we hear these patterns across, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, Christian, secular. We could name endless groups. Those people are monsters. Those people are insane. Those people are evil. Those people are demonic. When we begin seeing people like that, then we need to ask, well, how do we treat demons? Traditionally in, religious culture, you drive demons out. How do you treat a weed? You yank it out of the soil and let it die or burn it. And what do we see happening in our society increasingly? We see people being uprooted from their families, uprooted from their communities, being arbitrarily arrested or deported. We see a rising tide of fear in our society, Jeremy. It's incredible. It reminds me so much of the time before the Ethiopian Civil War. I have more and more friends who are asking, like, should I post that on social media? Or is saying that human beings in Gaza should not be subjected to bombardment and starvation and constant fear. Can I say that? Or is that going to come back around to hurt me when I'm applying for a job? Or when I want my church leaders to recognize me as like a real follower of Jesus, or I'm trying to advance in my academic path or career. This is a kind of level of self-censorship that is emerging that I've seen in these other contexts that we're on the brink of really dangerous, devastating conflict. And it started with, well, can't really associate with those people because they have been marked as not connected to us, not equal to us. If I show compassion to them, I might be seen as traitorous, as betraying. I'll tell you the truth, Jeremy. When you asked me at the beginning of this conversation, how has your faith changed in the last 10 years? And I started, well, I've been meeting God and Muslim people. I started thinking, oh man, I wonder if there's some Christian listeners to this conversation that we're about to have who are going to immediately turn me off because I said that. And really all that I said was, I experienced a sacred sense of connection with people of another faith. But when othering is operative inside of our faith, and we say, well, we've got all of the truth, we've got a monopoly on a faithful connection with God. So if Andrew's saying he had some kind of connection with those Muslim people, like, he's probably lost his way. Those people are unrelated to us. And so I think this is the danger of othering, Jeremy. It can be super, super subtle where it's just like, yeah, I don't care what happens to those people. I'm not paying attention. It's indifference. But it can ratchet up to resentment, bitterness, enmity, the desire for people to suffer. And I think we see that more and more with our American discourse of, well, those Republicans, fill in the blank. Well, those Democrats, fill in the blank. And we assume that those people are all the same and that they're oversimplistically, they're bad, they're stupid, they're malicious in their intent. And then we begin people inside. But when we start eliminating people inside, that's the basis of eliminating people in general. So for me, othering is not meant to be, some kind of like clever academic term. It's just a little handle, a little tool to talk about this, I call it a tendency and a temptation that I think really lives inside of all of us. To either say like, we're separate, like we don't have a connection, or we have a superiority inferiority difference. And of course, we don't usually admit that, oh, well, I think of myself as superior to you, but man, I think that stuff lives inside of us and that we feel inferior. Like othering can also be done to ourselves. Like I'm experiencing a fresh round of this in my own personal life where I can see myself as less than others, as unrelated, as kind of, not a real participant in the belonging that matters. So othering can also be done inside and to ourselves. I think when we begin this alienation, we get into the danger zone of incredible loneliness, which we know is an epidemic in our society. For me, loneliness, it leads to an incredible sense of worthlessness. And then it can, of course, othering can lead to things like genocide, where armies and militias and communities are literally raping and killing and trying to destroy an entire group of other people. We see these patterns in our world today. So, I went on and on there, Jeremy, but I care a lot about I care a lot about othering, because I think we were made to be together and to see one another's value, and othering is the antithesis of that.
No, I think that is so powerful, so well said. And it's interesting you bring up Lord of the Rings, because you're right. When you see it displayed like that, here's what I think is brilliant. When a show does, orcs are the bad guy, or zombies are the bad guy, or aliens are the bad guy, we can feel pure joy when the bad guys get killed without any of that, like, I probably shouldn't like this as much as I do, right? Because we do completely other them. They're aliens, they're zombies, yes. They're orcs. They're not us. But the moment you start to have human enemies, I think there's a little tinge inside most of us, even if we deem them, they're the bad guys, right? There's this little tinge. And, I don't know if you ever watched Game of Thrones. Were you ever a Game of Thrones fan?
I have not seen it. I'm one of the few.
Okay, so they did a twist on this, and this is not like a plot spoiler or anything, but the original series, I always thought was a fascinating way of playing into this othering, where basically there was this is going to sound so nerdy, but humor me for a sec. There's these White Walkers that are like the undead. But the kicker is, if they kill you, you become one of them. So not only are you then dead, you cease to be who you are, but then almost you become this distorted version of who you used to be. And I remember there's a few, key people that would they would throughout the show would be killed by these White Walkers, and then they would become these bad guys, but you remember them as who they were. And it felt like such a betrayal, as just emotionally invested. Like, no, they're not that. They were us. And as I'm listening to you, it's like they were playing with the emotions of othering, right? Of, you used to be one of us, and now you've been poisoned or distorted, or and it's a powerful, visceral kind of reaction we have to that, because we very much function in this othering mentality. And it's one thing to say, okay, we watch Legolas shoot an arrow through an orc, and we go, yeah, that's cool. But I'm thinking in real time, the example most of us are seeing of this on our news feeds are, these ICE raids that we see nonstop, where you have nameless, often faceless ICE representatives who, it's as depersonal as we can make that. And then we have created this category of this phantom immigrant who is this, hyper criminal and is the bad guy and is the boogeyman, and we can deport them without any checks and balances and any rules. And what has shocked me is that good people are like, yes, let's get those bad people out of here. And it is such a stark example of othering. You go, what is, there's so many things breaking down in this example of, okay, yeah, we can talk about, hey, what is a healthy way for a government to have immigration? Sure, that's a nuanced conversation. But when you have masked people showing up in unnamed vehicles and taking, to undisclosed places, we have fully bought into othering. And I just think that's as I'm listening to you explain this, I'm like, that is literally on our doorstep right now. And I loved what you said about how you're learning from Muslims now. And I think, I'll go out on a limb, I think most people listening to this podcast, at least, are probably on board with that. They've made it through a whole bunch of other stuff to be here today, so they probably can hang with that. But I just recently wrote something in a blog post that is right what you're saying. Is I wrote something to the effect of, I have realized these days I connect far more with an open-minded atheist than I do with a closed-minded Christian. Mm-hmm. Like, that atheist and I will have a fantastic conversation. Now, I'm not going to other the Christian, but yes, there's going to be a rift there, a divide there. It's not going to be a seamless kind of conversation. You go, well, yeah, but you and the Christian theologically agree. And I would say, yeah, at one level we do, but our posture is so different that I would much rather spend my time with people of any faith who have an open-handed posture. And, this to me is what Paul writes in Galatians 5:6. Like, this is faith expressing itself in love. It's not about circumcision or not. That's an easy thing for Paul to say. Like, that was a big deal, Paul. And we want to say all these other things are big deal. But I just think where this book is so timely is when people realize, holy cow, this tendency to othering is consuming us unless we fight against it. I mean, have you learned any warning signs? Any like, hey, if you feel yourself doing this, or how does someone who's going, wait, I may be stuck in this, or I may be deep in this, how do we come up for air a little bit?
Yes. I think the simplest warning sign is when we begin accepting others being treated in ways that we don't want to be treated.
Yeah.
And that sounds ultra elemental, and it is, but it's elemental in the sense of foundational. How would I feel if masked men in unmarked vehicles showed up where I was, physically detained me, no arrest warrant, no evidence brought of what I had done to violate the law, no due process of the judicial system? How would I feel if that happened to me? I would be terrified. I would be enraged. I would feel like my dignity as a human being had been violated, not just as a citizen. And this is important to say, because citizenship can really mean that your value comes from holding a piece of paper that gives you legal representation in a political community. For people here who are following Jesus, the value is rooted in being created by God, whoever you are. So if I'm being treated in a way that's violating my human dignity, that's going to express itself in grief, in anger, in fear. And if I see other people being treated in that way, and it does not evoke in me that sense of there's something deeply wrong there, that person is being treated in a way that belittles them, that treats them as something less than a neighbor. And we'll probably get into this, but in the book I talk about a neighbor is someone that you see as morally connected and equally precious to yourself. It doesn't mean that they live, next door. It doesn't mean physical or geographic proximity. It means that sense of, oh, there's a moral connection between us, and you matter just as much as I do. When I stop seeing other people that way and like, well, yeah, no, they probably deserved it. Well, if somebody said, well, Andrew probably deserved it, that wouldn't be good enough for me.
Yeah.
Or if, he was wearing a hat that had this symbol on it. Those are bad people, so he must be part of that group. I was like, well, wait a second. Like, if somebody treated me that way because I just happened to like that hat and I wore it, and they're like, well, he must be one, I would never accept that. I don't think any of us would. So a warning sign of othering is when we become flippant or indifferent to the conditions in which other people are living and being treated that we would not accept for ourselves. That means that we have accepted a double standard. We somehow see them as unrelated or less than ourselves. And I would say a really significant warning sign, Jeremy, is in our language. If we start using degrading or dehumanizing language, those people are dogs, they're demons, they are psychopaths. When we start using this kind of language, we're in the danger zone of treating people as less than human. Talk and treatment often go hand in hand. When I'm talking about people like they're less than human, I can easily begin treating people like they're less than human. And I would ask all of our listeners, and I ask myself, where is there insulting language in my vocabulary? Where am I consuming media where it's accepted that you talk about people in insulting, degrading, belittling ways? Who are the leaders that I'm following, religious, political, otherwise, who have a habit of talking about other people in ways like they're evil, they're stupid, they're dangerous. People may do evil, stupid, dangerous things, but labeling people as such in these ways is an expression of othering, and it's very dangerous. And if you study things like the German Holocaust or the Rwandan genocide or the Ethiopian Civil War, a commonality that you'll see in all of these cases is that the other group or the other groups begin to be talked about in these demeaning, degrading ways. So in the German Holocaust, Jews were being talked about as rats. And rats have to be caught, they have to be exterminated. In the Rwandan genocide, the other was talked about as a cockroach. We know how cockroaches are treated. In the Ethiopian Civil War, the other group was talked about as a cancer. We know about how cancers are treated. If we hear or participate in language that is referring to other people in these degrading ways, it's a real danger sign that we're very vulnerable to illegal, immoral, destructive behavior, and we're seeing that in our society. So, yeah, this double treatment thing is crucial. This language thing is a crucial sign of othering, and I would just add again that notion of ungrievability.
That's so good.
Do I really care when others are suffering? Like, for example, like in the Israel-Gaza war, I've talked to a lot of people who say, well, Israel has a right to defend itself. Okay, we could talk about that, like you said about immigration. That's a really complex and subtle topic, and it's an important one to discuss. But does self-defense justify starving children, catastrophically destroyed infrastructure, the displacement of 2 million people, the deaths of over 60,000 people, but probably far more? This is a horrific situation. If that doesn't grieve me, and there's not something in me that just says, whatever the start of this was, that should not be happening. If that's not happening, if that grief is not turning on inside of me, that's probably a sign that there's some kind of othering inside of me that's blocking me from seeing myself as connected to the people of Gaza, saying like, yeah, they're equally precious as I am. So these are some cues and some clues that kind of program of othering is probably running inside of me or inside of my group.
Yeah, and that's, my goodness, when you start looking at the language, you're going to see it everywhere.
Everywhere.
And, raising kids, I think how often they come home and they'll tell me, conversations that they get in with their friends, and I'll have to say, like, we're not even talking these extremes, just subtle nuances of tearing people down with words and this and that, and it's so common, and to them, everybody talks like this. And it's like you have to retrain them to go, okay, but think about what that language is doing. And, you're using a joke at this group's expense that you're not in that group, and just simple things you realize. I love that you pointed out the language. You added a twist to this that I think was also so profound and is really worth noting to anybody that's going, yeah, I like this. Let's do this work. Because you tell some fascinating stories in the book about your time in Ethiopia and why you're not there currently. I mean, just a lot of amazing things that you talk about, and amazing people you met, and you really bring them to life in the words of the page. You also talk about some really scary stuff and some stuff that you go, holy cow, that's hard to even imagine. And then you have this line that it was so good. I just kind of sat there and sat with you from afar as I read this line and just went, wow. You said this, I learned a profound but painful lesson. When you love the other, you often become the other. And that one that's loaded. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, I feel emotional hearing you read that, Jeremy, because it's really personal, and I think that it's also a global pattern that has so much at stake in it. I was teaching at a graduate school of theology in Ethiopia, and I had a colleague whose office was just, I could see it from my desk. And we would give each other hugs in the morning. We would have lunch at the cafeteria together. We would go out of the office to share lunches together. There was a sense of affection, of trust, of connection, of being colleagues between us. And not only were we working for the same institution, we were also Christians, and we had a sense of being a professional and spiritual family. And once the Ethiopian Civil War began, there was more than one group, but there was a primary group in the north of Ethiopia, the Tigrayans, that were marked as the enemy in this war. And I was very public in my advocacy that the solution to the conflict in Ethiopia could not be one group dominating and destroying the other, that there needed to be a non-violent solution where the questions and the grievances and the demands of the different conflicting parties were heard and were discussed and were negotiated for an agreed upon solution that wouldn't involve, bombing and invading and raping and starving people. My colleague, that we used to hug and to work together and just encourage each other, he started writing publicly that I should be deported from Ethiopia and that I was like a colonizer, which, in the African continent, in the African context, you need to understand is a very loaded, and rightfully so, very loaded accusation. The colonizers were people who came to try to steal resources, to other and dehumanize African people, to abuse women, children, to extract resources, to treat people like they weren't people. And this colleague was saying that about me. Now, nothing had changed between us other than the fact that I was saying, as followers of Jesus and human beings, we are called to have compassion for the people who have been marked as the enemy. We cannot accept that destroying them is how we can move forward in this conflict. And that enough, just that expression of compassion for the other, made me the other. And now I was a colonizer who should be deported from the country and literally treated like I was unrelated and less than his community. I think that this pattern, Jeremy, is extremely powerful. Like, I know with certain friends, like if I express some sympathy for people that are associated with the Democratic Party or more liberal leaning, progressive leaning, are you one of them? Or, it was incredible, Jeremy, incredible. Last Sunday, I drove to Indiana to meet one of my dearest Ethiopian friends from Ohio. And we met for lunch at this playground, and as his daughter played, we caught up. And he was telling me about how he had he had recently moved to Ohio, and he had these neighbors that were just so full of kindness, and they had given him this beautiful dining room table, and they looked after his daughter when he needed to go to work, and they invited him to be part of their prayer group, And at the end of this story, he told me that they had a flag for a political movement in the country that he and I both deeply disagree with.
I think we can use our imagination.
I think we can. It was hilarious and beautiful that he told me like all of these stories of how these human people were lovely and thoughtful and generous and kind and trustworthy. And then, the cherry on top was they are clearly supporters of a movement that he and I both think should be seriously questioned. And I know that for some of my more progressive or quote unquote liberal friends, that if I told a story like that, I'm being like, well, there's some really good people with serious integrity who feel like they need to support that movement. Some of those friends would be like, Andrew, you lost your way, man. Like, you're no longer credible. You're no longer one of us. So when you love the other, you become the other. It's this issue of how groups so often form around othering, Jeremy. And the way that I know that you and I are in the same group is that we both have suspicion, or we have dislike, or we completely dehumanize those people. For me growing up, it was Muslims. It was gay and queer people, and now especially trans people. It could be Jewish people. It could be Catholic people. If you and I, can tell the joke about those groups and we both laugh, we both know, oh yeah, we're part of the same group. He thinks that's funny. I think that's funny. He doesn't feel guilt. I don't feel guilt. This is okay. But if you begin to say, like, I'm not trying to be self-righteous. I'm not trying to be the morality police like you with your kids. Like, I'm not trying to be holier than thou, but I don't think it's funny to make a joke about people who are hungry or having their rights eliminated. When you start saying, let's pause that and re-examine the way we're talking, the way we're laughing, the way that we're organizing our group, so often you'll start being seen with suspicion. You may be seen with hostility and rejection. So,
well, the challenge that you're talking about is so often these communities, and we can pick on Christian communities because you and I are talking from within the building, right?
Indeed.
So let's talk about Christian communities are often drawn together, held together, if you will, by a shared set of beliefs, right? So we in this community, we believe X, Y, and Z about God, and this is how we understand God. And because we all understand God that way, that's why we're here. Well, then a lot of people that I work with, the reason they end up, on my podcast or at a communion event or, deconstructing something is because they raised their hand at one point and said, okay, on the XYZ, if I don't believe the Z, can I still be a part of this? Like, I still like everything else, but I don't know that I agree with the Z anymore. And they're most often told, no, like, no, you don't belong here anymore. This is what we do. And so people begin to realize then the choice is you either shut your mouth, and if you really want to be a part of the community, you go along with XYZ, even if you stopped believing that a long time ago. And I know, as I suspect you do, so many people who live their life with that reality, where they are in a community of things they do not believe because they want the community aspect. And when I read that line from you, I realized this is another layer of that, where you can be in a tribe, in a community, and say, hey, actually, I don't think the way that we are treating them or that person is very loving, and I think maybe we're off on that. And all of a sudden, that your group, right, turns on you and goes, whoa, we all agreed that we're going to make this joke, or that these are the bad guys, or that these are, the whole scapegoating idea, mimetic theory. It's like, that is so deep. We need to have somewhere to aim it. And when I read that line from you, I just had never heard it articulated as clearly as you connected those dots, where when you stand up against othering, you invite it on yourself. And I just think that's probably a reason why more people don't want to do this work, to battle it, because it comes at such a cost.
Big time, Jeremy. I mean, that gets back to the question you asked me about how I've changed over the last 10 years and how love is not just this kind of fuzzy feeling or this kind of pleasant, floating in the air, everything is fine. Love means that I see you as morally connected to me and equally precious, and I'm going to treat you that way. I'm going to talk about you that way, whether you're in the room or not, whether you're in my border or not. And that's going to be costly for me if part of what makes my group's identity what it is that we don't like you, we make jokes about you, we treat you in a way that we don't want to be treated. That's going to take a lot of courage. And courage means consciously facing fear and choosing love, even though it's costly. Yeah. And I agree with you that I think that's why we see othering being so tolerated. In a lot of cases, it's not because, we're all, just so terrible. We want to belong. We want to be part of the group. We don't want to be othered. And it makes us feel safer if like, well, at least if I'm part of this group, maybe I'll be protected against what I don't want to suffer.
And that's what's so hard is you then talk to people who, because of their, intellectual understanding of God, couldn't go along with the beliefs of their community, or their community was trying to other a group or a person, and they went, hey, I just can't be a part of this anymore. But then their greatest need, their greatest desire is for community, right?
Yeah.
They are then looking around going, who can I rally with? And that's where, we need to create space for people to say, it's not about all of us agreeing on all of the nuances. And I'm just amazed how many Christians just cannot tolerate that idea of, we have to agree on all these things. And if that is your assumption, you're going to be in these very small, tight-knit little communities where everybody thinks alike, or at least pretends to think alike. And yet that is an environment to other, because it just inherently produces, because then you other the person who didn't agree with you, and they become, less than or whatever. And I think that's the work that you're doing, and, that I certainly am trying to do as well. But how do we create space for encouragement to do this work, to say, you don't have to villainize people. You can, but we acknowledge, it's certainly cost you, it's cost me. These journeys don't come without scars. And you go, yeah, you might lose your tribe. You might lose friends that you thought were with you. And yet one of the coolest things is when people find each other out of that season and the encouragement. That's how I think, you and I, when we first talked, we're like, oh, I like this guy. It's like we immediately felt that.
Yeah.
That is so powerful. And so I just encourage you today, if you're listening to this and you're like, I feel so discouraged, I feel like this has been my story. There are people out there. There are people working to create something beautiful that won't require you to other. They won't require you to sign a doctrinal belief sheet. It's possible. At least I've found that. And I would suspect you found that as well.
Yes, I have. I've certainly found that with you, Jeremy, and I've found that with other really cherished friends, and I found that with atheists and Muslims and with Hindus and with all expressions of humanity. What you're saying is bringing up something for me, Jeremy. Towards the end of the book, I have a section called The Perennial Wisdom of Neighbor Love, and I try to distill some of about 15 of the lessons that I observe from looking at the history of where did this movement of seeing and treating other people as neighbors come from. And the first one that I mentioned, this first lesson, is that othering is ironic. Othering, again, we're different, we're better, we're superior, but it always unleashes this behavior that is cheap, that is shabby, that's debasing, and that's destructive. Think about, here in the United States, our history of racism and slavery, where you had whole communities of white people saying that they were, closer to God, more civilized, more moral, more intellectual, etc., justified treating human beings like tools, like animals, slaughter. That's a really, really bitter and toxic irony. But the second observation is that neighbor love is paradoxical. And what I meant by that is that if you look at Jesus' manifesto for his public movement, he has this teaching where he says, love your enemies so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. I think this is such a tight and profound paradox. If you want full belonging with God, if you want to be part of the family, love the people that you think that you are justified to hate. That's what an enemy is. The Greek word literally means like a hated one. If you want to be fully in with God, love the people that you think you have a right to other. And the paradox of neighbor love is that we only exclude ourselves from full belonging with God when we exclude others from full belonging with God. And in the book, I try to trace this through, You know, the thinking and the practice of many recognized and respected Christians throughout what I call the neighbor love movement, the history of this movement that Jesus started, where he said, go into all the world and teach everybody to obey what I commanded you. What did Jesus command? To love the enemy as a neighbor. The book tries to unpack every passage where Jesus talks about this and where his followers talk about this. So when I think about how we've set up Christian culture and the way that that's created the discouragement and the loneliness that you were naming, Jeremy, I hope that this book reminds us of this paradox of neighbor love, that if we want to think seriously about what really distances us from God, it's when we refuse to love even the person or the group that we think is most validly rejected. And the reason is not because there's any othering in God. It's not because God's like, okay, I can't accept you anymore. I've got to get rid of you. I've got to trash you. I've got to other you. The reason is because at God's core, God is love. And if we find love threatening, repulsive, unworthy, then there's going to be some kind of block between us and God, because this is the very heart of God. So I hope part of what this book does when it looks at the problem of othering is to remind us of this paradox of neighbor love, that if we want to go back to what Jesus said about what really connects us to God or separates us from God, it goes down to this issue of, are we willing to love across every boundary? That's when we are like, yeah, fully part of God's family. Like there is this spiritual DNA that is alive and flowing through us in that love. And that's different than a list of doctrinal statements. And I think that for me, like, I have a particular atheist in mind who actually endorsed this book. His name's David Livingstone Smith, and he's one of the world's leading experts on dehumanization. I have some of his books right here. He's written books called Making Monsters Less Than Human, on inhumanity. And David doesn't believe in God. I believe passionately in God, Jeremy. But
I love that he endorsed your book. That's amazing.
It was so humbling, you know. He said, do you want to make the world a better place? Start here. He's an atheist. I'm a passionate believer in God and follower of Jesus. What we share is this passionate commitment to the value of human life. And I think that David is, as an atheist, is living into the paradox of neighbor love in ways that some of us who may feel like we're so orthodox, we're so right in what we believe and how we relate to God, may not be able to go across boundaries to love in the way that Jesus says, look, this is the marker of a family relationship with the divine.
What a beautiful way for you to practice not othering by literally having an atheist endorse your Christian teaching from Jesus on neighbor love. I mean, that is so beautiful.
I thought, you know, who could be a better, what's the word I'm trying to find? It's kind of like inspector of the authenticity of what I'm writing than someone who has deep disagreements with me. Like he could sniff out, like, you know, does this book sound good to other Christians? But if you're not a Christian, like there's still othering laced all throughout it. So I wanted David to read it and to tell me what he really thought, and to make sure that this book wasn't, you know, passing mustard for a Christian audience. Or Ibu Patel, you know, Ibu Patel is a Muslim, and he wrote an endorsement for this book. I wanted Ibu to, he's the founder of Interfaith America. I wanted him to read it and sniff it out and see, you know, is this book actually talking about authentic love of the neighbor, or is it still this kind of pious game that Andrew's playing? So that was essential for me to get these kinds of, for the book to be tested by people who are coming from very similar but very different perspectives.
Well, if our good news is only good news for people who agree with us, it's not the gospel.
Amen. Yeah.
And that's what you're showing is this is good news, even if you don't follow Jesus, because Jesus is offering literally a way that changes the world, that remakes the world, that a Muslim can recognize, that an atheist can recognize and say, yeah, I don't get there the way you get there, but the conclusion is really good.
Yeah.
Which what a testament to it being meaningful.
Yes. 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 Big time, brother. Big time. I'm kind of really, really moved by this final message from Jesus at the end of his movement, where he says, go into all the world and make disciples of all people. A disciple is a learner, a practitioner, someone whose way of life is shaped and defined by what they learn. Jesus goes against othering here. He's saying cross every boundary, interact with every group of people, and do two things. Baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And of course, at the beginning of Jesus' story in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is baptized. And what happens in that baptism experience is that Jesus has this kind of psychedelic experience where heaven is open and he sees a vision of God as this dove of peace, this gentle, nurturing, safe presence, and he hears God say, you're my beloved child, I delight in you. He hears this expression of unconditional acceptance and pleasure in God, in his presence. And when Jesus says that we're meant to be baptizing, I think that he's alluding to that primal experience in his own story where he encountered his own belovedness, and he says, wow, like when the heavens part, like when you really get it, when you see through all of the facades and the veils and the packaging, you're loved and accepted, and there's precious value in you. Like, if that's not extending beyond our Christian community, then we're not following this commission, this invitation that Jesus gave. And then when he said to teach people to obey, to hear, to practice, to take seriously what I taught you, it's again this paradox of love that we find what truly matters when we love across every boundary, including with the person that we've marked the enemy, the ultimate other, the other that you can feel fine about hating. Well, they're the enemy, so whatever happens to them doesn't really matter. If that belovedness and that practice of radical love isn't crossing every boundary like Jesus said, then we're no longer extending the movement that Jesus himself launched. And I think there's been a significant misunderstanding, Jeremy, of like what we call the Great Commission actually is, this kind of final invitation from Jesus to continue his work on earth. I think it was all about neighbor love, baptism in belovedness, and an invitation to actually embody and practice what he taught across every boundary of identity and difference.
Love it. That's beautiful. Well, I think you've sold us. I'm sold. I'll read the book.
Cheers.
All right. I want to spend a few moments that we got left transitioning you to some questions that I like to ask each of our guests, and then we let the listeners compare your answers to everyone who's come before you. So we'll start with the fun one. This is always very open-ended. I get lots of different answers to this one. If I were to say to you, Andrew, in your entire life, if I were to ask you, what's the best glass of wine you've ever had? Is there a moment that comes to your mind? Is there a story? Was it a particular bottle? Was it a setting? Was it who you were with? Do you have anything like that comes to your mind of just the best interaction you've ever had with wine?
All right. What came to mind, Jeremy?
Yes, give it to us.
Was more about the person than the bottle. So you're gonna have to forgive me for that.
No,
but,
that we accept that answer.
All right, awesome. I have not been othered. The paradox of love is operational here. I love it. I receive it. So, yeah, when Lily was turning 30, We were living in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is about a 5-hour flight from Rome. And, Lily and I have had a pretty frugal, modest life. That's still the case now. And we hadn't been able to travel very much in our marriage. And so for her 30th birthday, I wanted to take her to Rome to surprise her and to just say that I love her and that I just want to spend time with her and for us to discover this other part of the world together. And I'll never forget that we were at this tiny, of course, Italian restaurant in Rome, like on this back alleyway with this just simple table with candlelight and a bottle of wine and glasses and a meal that we enjoyed. And I can see Lily's face in my mind, as we're talking now, of just how beautiful she is as a human being who lives with incredible kindness, with truthfulness, with radical commitment to me across the different seasons of my life. And I mean, at that time, Jeremy, we didn't know that a civil war was going to erupt in Ethiopia. There was a lot ahead of us that we didn't know, but the love, the commitment, that unconditional promise to one another was alive and well. And so sharing that wine at that table on that night on Lily's 30th birthday, the beginning of a new decade, was really, really special. And I think we had red wine. I don't remember the exact kind.
Love it.
But it was really special.
That is a great answer, Andrew. Well done. I love that story. Okay. Which member of church history would you trust to pick a bottle of wine for you? And who would you not trust and why?
Wow. Well, I always heard that Martin Luther was a beer guy and that John Calvin was a wine guy. So Calvin may have some knowledge of wine, but I have some critiques of both of those dear brothers. Who would I trust to pick out a bottle of wine? You know what I'm going to say is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich, he's right behind me there. I've written a book about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was a guy who really loved life, and he thought that an authentic Christian faith wasn't about rejecting the world. It was about embracing the world as made and loved by God and really caring for it. And Bonhoeffer was a guy who enjoyed nice things. He was from a really educated, upper-class German family. But Bonhoeffer didn't allow that background and that belief to separate him from other people or to remain detached from people who are suffering. And in fact, Bonhoeffer's commitment to the goodness of the world and the beauty of the other drove him to sacrifice his life in the German Holocaust on behalf of Jewish people. He said our relationship with God is not an infinite, unattainable task, but the neighbor within reach in any situation. Isn't that amazing, Jeremy, that we access God through the neighbor, not through this kind of unattainable thing? So I think Bonhoeffer's a guy who would combine like a really good taste for wine without being too like snooty or elitist or maybe excessive. And he might he's probably laughing at his grave right now. He's like, Andrew, I would drink $1,000 bottle of wine tonight. But yeah, I think of Bonhoeffer as a guy who thread the needle between really enjoying and also having a deep sense of connection.
I'm with you. That makes sense
people.
To me.
Yeah.
Okay, who do you not trust from church history to pick you out a bottle?
Whew, this is I've never been asked this question at all before. Who do I not trust to pick me out a bottle of wine? All right, I'm gonna take this. So Jeremy,
I'm so excited for this answer.
Oh man, I'm wrestling inside of myself. Wow. So for the first 300 years of Christian history, there's pretty definitive evidence that followers of Jesus were pretty radically committed to nonviolence. They weren't willing to serve in the military because they weren't willing to kill people because they thought that all people were made in God's image and were sacred. And our dear brother Eusebius is a historian of the church. He's known as, some people think of him as the father of church history. Eusebius gave this famous talk called the Oration in Praise of Constantine. And it's this verbose, long message about why Constantine was sent by God and is like the greatest thing ever. And Constantine, as listeners may know, is the emperor who supposedly had this vision of the cross and heard, "In this sign conquer." And this was the beginning of Christianity and the Roman Empire really becoming partners, and Christians beginning to see the extension of the kingdom of God through conquering and killing people, the exact opposite of what Jesus said with his Great Commission. So I don't know if I would trust Eusebius to pick out a good wine for me. I think that there might be something a little bit toxic about that wine, even as I refuse to other that dear brother, and he has a lot of good things to teach us. But yeah, I don't know if our tastes would be, if we'd have the same palate or not. I don't know if I'd be wanting to drink Constantine's wine, and I think Eusebius might be more cool with that.
Oh, that's great. I love that you're even in turmoil. I'm not othering him. I'm just saying I wouldn't want him to pick my wine.
Just not pick my wine. That's it.
Yeah. That's all we're asking. Just some people you might say, you know what? I got it, Eusebius. I got it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. What is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
Oh man, there's so many. Which one do I want to pick? I think that I used to believe that the Bible was this simplistic book and every passage was saying the same thing. It was kind of like an encyclopedia where if you had a question, just go to the Bible, find the right text, pluck it out, and there's your timeless answer once and for all. And one of the definitions that I would give of repentance is the joy of being wrong. When I discover, oh, I thought it was like this, but it's not. It's like this, and it's actually better that it's not the way that I thought it was. So, for example, Jeremy, in the book I talk about how you have passages where biblical characters are engaging in serious othering. For example, Moses in the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 7 says there are whole groups of people that you shouldn't look on with kindness. You should actually try to kill all of them. And he will go beyond that and say, yeah, you should even kill their infants, like not just adults, not just kids, like little babies, kill them too. And I've come to see that part of God's wisdom in Scripture is that God has given us this complex library of books that we have to wrestle with that transforms us. Because when you read, okay, there are these groups of people that have been marked out for elimination, don't show them any compassion, and then you skip forward a few hundred pages and you read, you've heard it said, love your neighbor but hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your neighbor so that you can be children of your Father in heaven. There's tension there. There's complexity there. There's the question of, wait a second. If what Jesus is saying is really the heart of God, then we're probably seeing instances where people are speaking in the name of God, but not representing what God truly desires for us. And then I have to start looking in a mirror and saying, how am I doing that? How am I so sure that I'm right? How am I so sure that those people need to be separated, eliminated, and that this is God's desire for me, and that this is proof that I'm right with God? Oh, how am I doing that still today? So, yeah, an area where I've definitely experienced growth in my worldview is the Bible is this complex library of books that's inviting us to get into it, to wrestle with the story, and to grow up through seeing like, man, there's tensions, there's contestations going on in this book. And am I actually willing to follow the Jesus who says, okay, you've heard various different things, but this is what I want you to see as essential. Love across every boundary, including the person that you've been feeling entitled to hate. And that's really changed how I read the Bible, Jeremy, no longer as an answer book, but as a process of seeing what is it like to be human, where we're like, yeah, we're so sure that God says this and wants this. And what if there's an invitation to reconsider, to step back, to stop and think, to be like, oh, I've heard this, but what God really wants is something that's surprising, something that's more costly than I imagined, something that my community may say, whoo, Andrew, I think you've lost your way.
That's how you know in the spirit's doing something.
Whoo,
You get that
indeed.
little tingle.
There's a little tingle. There's a little tingle. Like, I bring this up in the book, Jeremy, but I love it that in Luke chapter 4, Jesus is giving his first public sermon in his hometown. And it says that people are hanging on his words and delighting in what he said. So he's like really eloquent, and he's talking about there'll be freedom, there'll be favor. That's what everybody wants, freedom and favor. And he's quoting Isaiah chapter 61, but Jesus stops quoting the text when the text becomes othering. If you go back and you read Isaiah 61, the verses after the part that Jesus quoted begin talking about how the community of Israel will basically be using other people as their forced labor and extracting their wealth for their own enrichment. And Jesus stops quoting that text. And then Jesus goes to these two other passages in Scripture where you have prophets literally living with a foreign widow and healing a foreign leper. So Jesus pauses that part of Isaiah, goes to these other scriptures and says, actually, what I want you to focus on next is these prophetic people who had literally made their home and their healing with people who had been marked as outsiders or maybe even marked for elimination. How does the community respond to that part of Jesus' sermon? They want to drag him out of town and throw him off a cliff and get rid of him. There's a tingle, a significant tingle. But that's how Jesus reads the Bible. And it was costly for how Jesus read the Bible, and it's going to be costly for us today. But that's been one that continues to grow in me, is seeing the Bible as this really complex dialogue between God and humanity.
Great answer. What is something that's blowing your mind right now? What's Andrew learning?
What's blowing my mind right now is how sensitive and fragile human beings are, and how important it is for us to foster relationships of real vulnerability, where we can share pretty raw fears, doubts, sorrows. We can look incredibly strong, incredibly put together, incredibly knowledgeable and competent outside, and yet inside of that inner world of the human being, there can be such fragility and such a need for gentleness, patience, really, really careful listening. And this is such a basic observation, Jeremy. This is not a mind-blowing insight by any stretch, but last night Lily and I were talking about patterns in American culture, and it occurred to me that I think a basic assumption of American life is that American life basically makes sense, and that if you just follow American culture with the way that we do money and the way that we do identity and the way that we do politics, that you're going to basically live a good life. I think so many of the cultural values that we've been raised with, especially around consumerism, around nationalism, around feeling like we have some kind of exceptional, elevated connection with God and value in the grand scheme of things, is actually really, really harmful for all of us. And it blocks us from entering into these intimate, vulnerable relationships of radical honesty about how much pain there can be in life, about how much suffering there can be in life. And again, this takes me back to, wow, how profound that Jesus' movement began in this moment of hearing, "You're my beloved child. I delight in you." I mean, Jesus is whatever. We think he's like 30 years old, which in his context, he was significantly advanced in age. And yet he's being talked to in this very affectionate, tender way by God as a son, who's beloved and who's a source of happiness. I think we all need that. And the more, people that I talk to, Jeremy, who, whether they seem like they're brilliant or they are super successful in business, they have a lot of money, they're very influential. There's this core need inside for a very honest, vulnerable connection with grief, with suffering, and with trust and commitment in the midst of it. I think I'm being freshly amazed by how much pain can live inside the human heart.
Yeah.
And how much we all need love. Again, not as this kind of this cheap, superficial, fleeting feeling, but this enduring, gritty commitment to being with and for one another.
Yeah, I love that. What is a problem that you're trying to solve?
Ooh, what's a problem I'm trying to solve? I think I'm starting to notice, Jeremy, that I had some really big dreams for my life, for my vocation, going into the Ethiopian Civil War. And that involved creating a center of imagination and learning and community building in Addis Ababa that would nurture this culture of seeing and treating others as neighbors. And I'm discovering how the Ethiopian Civil War was an earthquake, it was a tsunami, it was a tornado. Pick your metaphor that left a lot of wreckage, literally and metaphorically, including inside of me. And a problem that I'm trying to work on is how can I continue expanding my imagination and dreaming when opening my heart to dreaming and things that may feel like they've been flattened or like they've been blown to pieces, when that feels really scary or silly or pointless. So this is a problem that I'm working on in myself, is how can the imagination continue to open and expand after really, really painful experiences that have made things like faith, hope, and love feel scary, dangerous, because they make you vulnerable to being deeply hurt. And I think that this is a problem that many of us face, and it's partially how othering sets in. Like, yeah, I've tried to connect with people who are different than me. Like, it didn't go the way that I wanted, so I'm not going to get burned again. I'm not going to cross that bridge again. Let me, cut them off. So how do we keep the heart soft and open and expanding in a world where there's so much potential for pain?
Yeah, I love that. What's something you're excited about right now?
I am very excited about going to Ireland. Lily and I are going to take a trip for the very first time to Ireland together next month. Ireland, Jeremy, is actually where my life as a writer began. In 2003, my dear friend Matthew Robinson and I were students in college, and we went to Southern Ireland, and we stayed with a family on a farm with this old castle ruin, and we wrote our first book. The book was never published, but that's where I began book writing 22 years ago. And so it's going to be really special after this baby came out to return with Lily to that space in Ireland. She's going to be able to meet that family and to just see the beauty of that landscape in a place of just profound spiritual reflection. Like, talking about seeing God in everything and everyone, where we began this conversation. That's a very Celtic form of spirituality. So I'm excited for Lily and I to head there together, return to the roots of my writing, and for us to see this beautiful place with beloved people where there's just a lot of invitation to a larger love for God and people.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
And maybe some wine, but
Okay,
probably
as we
more
wrap this
stout.
up, or yeah, you could get some whiskey, you could get some stout. Yeah, you can get all sorts of stuff. There's options. You're gonna have options there.
There's options, yeah.
All right, as we think about what we've just talked about, it's been an incredible conversation. Is there anything else you want to add that I didn't get to all my questions for the sake of time, but is there anything that are like, look, we can't wrap this up until I address this?
You know, I think we've gotten to the heart of the matter. I think we really have. Othering is a crucial problem that we're facing today. It's the gateway to places where we don't want to go. And the response to that problem is to see and treat other people as precious and value and morally connected to us. And this is an ancient movement. I guess maybe this is the piece that I want to add, Jeremy. Love your neighbor as yourself is not this kind of abstract, timeless, lifeless moral dictum, you know, this kind of dusty ethical imperative. This is a movement that's been unfolding across thousands of years of history to see more and more people as, oh yeah, those people are equally connected and precious in value. Oh yeah, those people too. Oh yeah, those people too. And I guess what I would ask is, how can our listeners see themselves as participants in this movement? And are there groups of people in our society today that are still safe to other and to not see as neighbors? And I would ask for each one of us to give special attention, special energy, and risk-taking to say, who are the people that are still safe to see as unrelated and less? And how can we build relationships? Just enter into relationship and listen and learn. For example, I'm in a relationship with a dear friend who's a trans person, and I'm learning from their story, and I'm asking questions, and I'm just doing a lot of listening, and I'm allowing a lot of my ignorance, you know, to be exposed and to be transformed. And I'm so grateful for this friend's teaching and kindness. Who are these groups of people, whether you agree or disagree, that are still safe to other and that you can enter into relationship with and build a relationship of love, of connection, of care, of respect, of mutual service, of mutual flourishing. So let's see neighbor love as a movement that is still continuing in our time and that is still wanting to expand this moral circle in which we're called to belong. And that's part of why this cover, Jeremy, has these kind of swirling circles of this ever-expanding movement of belonging that's getting larger and larger and being woven together. And I think that it doesn't take a whole lot of reflection to see, yeah, there's a whole lot of people that we still think that we can write off and not care about what really happens to them. We've already named some in this conversation. So super grateful, brother, to be able to talk about these things and to have a glass of wine with you today in the afternoon. I think this is a lot of fun here.
Yeah, this does not suck. This is not a painful part of what I get to do every week. Okay, so if someone's listening to you and they're like, man, I like this guy, I really want to connect more, what's the best way for them to connect with what you're doing?
Yeah, they can go to andrew-decourt.com, and a lot of my writings are there. My contact is there. I'd love to receive an email. I'm pretty active on Facebook. If people are there, they could jump on and read what I'm writing there and send me a message if that's easier for them. And I've just started a Substack that's called Reframe with Andrew DeCort, and that's looking at the headlines and contemporary news through the lens of the Beatitudes. What do we have to learn about the world as it is, not as we want it to be, through the lens of the things that Jesus said blessing upon? So people could follow me on Substack. But yeah, I'd love it if people would jump on my website, andrew-decourt.com, and find my email and just reach out and we can start a conversation.
And when is the official launch date for the book?
So I've gotten my early copy here, and the official launch date is October 2nd. The book is available for pre-order on Amazon, Bookshop, IVP Academic, wherever books are sold. And some of my friends who have pre-ordered the book have already gotten their copies. So it seems like some copies are getting out early. So that's pretty exciting. But October 2nd.
That's redefining the concept of a pre-order.
Indeed, it's very pre. It's very pre, but that's nice.
You can pre-order this and we will pre-give it to you before it is available. So that's fantastic. All right. Well, I'll certainly put a bunch of those links in the show notes. And Andrew, I just got to tell you, man, I just so appreciate you. So appreciate the voice that you have, that you are partnering with God. You are bringing more beauty into the world. And when the world feels heavy and evil feels like it's never ending, I always look to, like, how do we just bring a little bit more beauty into the world today? How do we partner with what God's doing today? And you just embody that so well. And just the posture that you take is so refreshing. So thank you for spending the time with us. I know our listeners are going to be tremendously blessed by this, but thanks for the work you're doing. And I'm excited for a whole bunch of people to get to read this latest book.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm grateful for your kindness, and may beauty abound in our world. Beauty is crucial to our healing, and I'm just grateful that I got to experience beauty with you today, and laughter. Laughter is crucial as well, brother. Thanks for bringing out the joy.
Yeah, and the wine helps with that as well. So that's our secret. Well, hey, everybody, go check out Andrew. Check out his book, Reviving the Golden Rule, coming out in October or earlier, evidently, if you pre-order it now. So you can support Andrew in that way, and we'll see you on the next episode of Cabernet and Pray.